The autumn air carried a sharp chill through the livestock auction barn in rural Montana as buyers gathered for what was expected to be one of the season's most profitable cattle sales. Wealthy ranchers and commercial breeders filled the bleachers, their expensive boots and custom hats marking them as the elite of the cattle industry. The morning had already seen impressive bulls sell for tens of thousands of dollars, each transaction representing years of careful breeding and substantial investment. But as lot number 73 was led into the ring, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The bull that entered was nothing like the magnificent specimens that had commanded such high prices earlier in the day. Goliath, a 4-year-old Angus mix, moved with obvious pain from an old injury that had left him with a permanent limp. His black coat, though still carrying hints of his former glory, was dull and patchy from months of poor nutrition. Most damaging of all was his temperament. Goliath had gained a reputation for being difficult and unpredictable after an incident where he had refused to be loaded into a transport trailer, resulting in a costly delay for his previous owner. "Here we have lot 73, the auctioneer announced with notably less enthusiasm than he had shown for previous animals. "Goliath, 4 years old, from Riverside Ranch. Now, folks, I'll be honest. This bull has had some challenges, but he might suit someone looking for a breeding project at the right price." The response from the crowd was immediate and brutal. Laughter rippled through the bleachers as buyers exchanged dismissive comments about the reject bull standing in the center of the ring. Wealthy ranch owner Clayton Matthews, known for his prize-winning operation, shook his head in disgust. "Who would waste space on a crippled bull? That animal belongs in a meat processing plant, not a breeding program." "Look at that limp," called out another prominent breeder. "Genetic defect, guaranteed. Any calves from that bull would be worthless. Someone should put him out of his misery." The cruel comments continued to flow as Goliath stood in the center of the ring, his breathing heavy but controlled. Despite the pain he was obviously experiencing and the hostility directed toward him, the bull maintained a dignity that spoke of noble character. His dark eyes, though reflecting weariness, still held a spark of intelligence that seemed to survey the crowd with understanding. But in the back row of the auction house, away from the jeering crowd of wealthy buyers, sat Harold Whitman, a 78-year-old retired veterinarian whose weathered hands spoke of a lifetime devoted to healing animals. Harold had driven 2 hours from his small farm to attend the auction, not to buy expensive breeding stock, but to look for animals that others had given up on. His modest pension and the small savings he had accumulated over decades of rural practice meant he couldn't compete with the wealthy ranchers for prize bulls, but his trained eye could see potential where others saw only problems. Harold studied Goliath carefully, his experienced gaze looking beyond the surface imperfections that so repulsed the other bidders. He noticed how the bull favored his right side, but also saw that his left legs moved with natural strength and coordination. The limp appeared to be the result of an old injury rather than a genetic defect, something that could potentially be managed with proper care and rehabilitation. More importantly, Harold saw something in Goliath's eyes that the other buyers had missed entirely. A quiet intelligence and gentle nature that had been overlooked in favor of surface judgments. "Let's start the bidding at $3,000, the auctioneer called out hopefully. Silence filled the barn. Not a single hand moved in the crowd. "How about $2,000? More silence, punctuated by fresh waves of derisive laughter. "Come on, folks, someone must need a pasture ornament. $1,000? Still nothing. Goliath continued to stand in the center of the ring, his dignity intact despite the humiliation being heaped upon him. Harold could see the defeat beginning to creep into the bull's posture, the way his head lowered slightly as he seemed to understand that he was unwanted, rejected by everyone who saw him. $500? $300? Surely someone can find a use for this animal at $200. The auctioneer's voice grew increasingly desperate as he tried to generate even token interest in Goliath. Harold felt his heart breaking as he watched the proud bull endure wave after wave of rejection. Every instinct told him to raise his hand, but doubt gnawed at his confidence. At 78, did he have the strength and resources to take on the challenge of rehabilitating a bull that everyone else had written off? What if the crowd was right? What if he was just a sentimental old man making a foolish decision? "Last chance, folks. $200 for lot 73, or he goes back to the cellar," the auctioneer announced with grim finality. Harold knew what going back meant for an unwanted bull. The slaughterhouse, where Goliath would be reduced to nothing more than ground beef, his potential forever unrealized. It was then that Goliath did something that changed everything. The bull, perhaps sensing Harold's internal struggle, turned his head and looked directly at the elderly veterinarian. In that moment of eye contact, Harold saw not just an animal in need, but a fellow soul who had been judged and found wanting by a world that valued perfection over character. The connection was instantaneous and profound. Harold saw in Goliath's eyes the same weariness he felt in his own aging body, the same dignity in the face of rejection that he had experienced when younger veterinarians had dismissed his old-fashioned methods, the same quiet strength that had carried him through decades of caring for animals that others had given up on. Without hesitation, Harold's weathered hand shot up just as the auctioneer was raising his gavel to close the bidding. $200, the elderly veterinarian called out, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet auction house. Every head in the building turned to stare at him, hundreds of eyes focusing on the old man who had dared to bid on the unwanted bull. The expressions ranged from surprise to pity to outright mockery. Clayton Matthews shook his head in theatrical disbelief. Well, there's a fool born every minute. That old-timer just threw away his Social Security check on a worthless animal. Someone should tell him he's buying expensive hamburger, another voice added, generating fresh laughter from the crowd. But Harold ignored the cruel comments entirely. His attention was focused solely on Goliath, who had turned to face him completely now, as if understanding that his fate had just taken an unexpected turn. The bull's eyes held a mixture of hope and wariness, as if he wanted to believe in this second chance but had been disappointed too many times before. The auctioneer, clearly relieved to finally close this embarrassing lot, quickly brought down his gavel. Sold to bidder 47 for $200. As Harold made his way through the jeering crowd to claim Goliath, the whispers and cruel comments followed him like a swarm of insects. Poor old guy probably thinks he's getting the deal of a lifetime, someone said loudly. Wait until he tries to breed that cripple and gets nothing but veterinary bills. But Harold had heard it all before during his long career. The doubts, the criticism, the dismissal of his methods by those who valued profit over compassion. He had learned long ago that the most valuable things in life were often found in the most unlikely packages, and that sometimes the greatest rewards came from taking chances on those whom everyone else had abandoned. As he approached Goliath with the lead rope provided by an auction hand, Harold spoke softly to the bull. Easy, boy. We're going home now. You and I are going to show them all what real worth looks like. Goliath allowed Harold to attach the lead rope without resistance, and as the elderly veterinarian began to lead him from the auction ring, something remarkable happened. The bull's limp, which had been so pronounced during his time in the ring, seemed to lessen as he walked beside Harold. It was as if the simple act of being chosen, of being valued by someone, had already begun the healing process that would transform both their lives in ways neither could imagine. The crowd continued to laugh and make disparaging comments as Harold and Goliath made their way toward the exit, but neither the old man nor the rejected bull paid them any attention. They had found each other in a moment of mutual need, and together they were about to embark on a journey that would prove that sometimes the most meaningful connections are formed not between the strong and the perfect, but between the wounded and the wise. The 2-hour drive back to Harold Whitman's modest farm passed in contemplative silence, broken only by the gentle rumble of Goliath's breathing from the trailer behind them. Harold gripped the steering wheel of his weathered pickup truck, his mind alternating between doubt and determination. At 78, he had thought his days of taking on major rehabilitation cases were behind him, but something about Goliath's eyes had awakened the passionate veterinarian he had always been. Harold's farm was a testament to a lifetime of caring for animals that others had given up on. The 40-acre property featured well-maintained pastures, a modest barn that had been built with his own hands 40 years earlier, and a small farmhouse that had been home to countless rescued animals over the decades. Unlike the sprawling estates owned by the wealthy ranchers at the auction, Harold's farm radiated warmth and purpose rather than ostentation. As Harold backed the trailer up to the barn, his border collie, Sage, emerged from the house with the alert curiosity of a dog accustomed to welcoming new arrivals. At 12 years old, Sage had been Harold's constant companion since her own rescue as an abandoned puppy, and she possessed an uncanny ability to assess the emotional state of every animal that came to the farm. Harold opened the trailer gate slowly, speaking in the soft, reassuring tones that had calmed thousands of frightened animals throughout his career. Easy, Goliath. Take your time, boy. There's no rush here, no pressure. This is your home now. Goliath emerged from the trailer with cautious dignity, his massive frame moving carefully as he assessed his new surroundings. The bull's dark eyes took in every detail of the farm. The green pastures, the sturdy barn, the gentle presence of Sage, and most importantly, the absence of the hostile energy that had surrounded him at the auction. For the first time in months, Goliath's breathing seemed to deepen and relax. Harold led Goliath to a spacious paddock adjacent to the barn, where fresh hay waited in a feeder and clean water filled a large trough. As Goliath began to explore his new environment, Harold conducted the kind of thorough examination that had made him legendary among local farmers during his active practice years. What Harold discovered both saddened and encouraged him. Goliath's limp was indeed the result of an old injury, a poorly healed fracture in his right front leg that had never received proper veterinary care. The bull was significantly underweight, his ribs visible beneath his dull coat, and several minor injuries showed signs of neglect. But Harold's experienced hands also detected the solid bone structure and strong muscle development that spoke of excellent genetic potential hidden beneath the surface damage. "You've been through hell, haven't you, boy?" Harold murmured as he examined Goliath's injured leg. "But that's going to change now. We're going to take this one day at a time. No pressure, no expectations except that you get to be comfortable and safe." Over the following weeks, Harold established a rehabilitation routine that drew upon 6 decades of veterinary experience and an intuitive understanding of animal psychology. Rather than rushing to fix Goliath's problems, Harold focused on building trust and allowing the bull's natural healing processes to begin. The injured leg received daily therapy, gentle massage, controlled exercise, and carefully administered anti-inflammatory medication that Harold obtained through his network of veterinary colleagues. But it was the nutritional rehabilitation that produced the most dramatic changes. Harold prepared specialized feed mixtures that provided exactly the vitamins and minerals Goliath's body craved after months of inadequate nutrition. Within 3 weeks, the bull's coat began to regain its lustrous black sheen, and the prominent ribs gradually disappeared as healthy weight returned to his frame. More remarkable than Goliath's physical recovery was his emotional transformation. The wary, defensive animal that had emerged from the trailer gradually gave way to a creature of surprising gentleness and intelligence. Goliath seemed to understand that Harold represented safety and healing, and he began to seek out the elderly veterinarian's company, often positioning himself near the fence whenever Harold worked in the yard. Harold noticed that Goliath possessed an unusual level of emotional intelligence, particularly in his interactions with other animals on the farm. When Harold's arthritic old mare, Belle, struggled with mobility on cold mornings, Goliath would position himself as a windbreak, using his massive body to shelter her from harsh weather. The bull showed similar sensitivity toward Harold himself, somehow sensing when the elderly veterinarian's own arthritis was causing him pain and adjusting his behavior to be less demanding on those difficult days. If you believe that every animal deserves a second chance to show their true nature, give this video a like to support Harold and Goliath's journey. 6 weeks after the auction, Harold was documenting Goliath's progress when he made a discovery that would change everything. While reviewing old veterinary journals in his study, he came across an article about a prize-winning Angus bull named Thunder Valley Champion who had dominated breeding competitions 15 years earlier. The photograph accompanying the article showed a bull with markings and bone structure remarkably similar to Goliath's. Harold's investigation revealed that Thunder Valley Champion had sired numerous offspring before dying unexpectedly of natural causes, and that his bloodline was considered among the most valuable in American cattle breeding. The article mentioned that several of Champion's offspring had been sold to various ranches throughout the region, but that detailed records had been lost when the Thunder Valley operation changed ownership. Intrigued by the possibility, Harold contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a genetic specialist at the State University who had been a former student of his. Dr. Chen agreed to conduct DNA analysis on samples from Goliath, using genetic markers from Thunder Valley Champion's archived material to determine if there was a familial connection. The results arrived on a crisp October morning that Harold would remember for the rest of his life. According to Dr. Chen's analysis, Goliath was not just related to Thunder Valley Champion, he was the legendary bull's direct son, carrying genetics that represented millions of dollars in breeding potential. "Harold, this is extraordinary," Dr. Chen explained during their phone conversation. "Goliath carries some of the most sought-after genetic markers in American cattle breeding. His offspring would be incredibly valuable to serious breeders. But for Harold, the genetic revelation was less important than what he had already discovered about Goliath's character. The bull's noble bloodline simply confirmed what the elderly veterinarian had seen from the beginning, that beneath the surface damage and rejection lay an animal of exceptional quality and potential. Subscribe to our channel to see how Harold's patient care transforms not just Goliath's body, but his entire understanding of what it means to be valued and loved. As autumn progressed into winter, word of Goliath's transformation began to spread through the local farming community. Neighbors who had heard about Harold's foolish purchase at the auction started stopping by to see the bull for themselves, and many left amazed by what they witnessed. Goliath's physical recovery was dramatic enough, but it was his calm temperament and obvious intelligence that truly impressed visitors. Local farmer Tom Rodriguez, who had initially laughed at Harold's auction purchase, found himself eating humble pie when he saw Goliath 6 months later. "Harold, I owe you an apology," Tom admitted as they watched Goliath grazing peacefully in the pasture. "I thought you'd lost your mind buying that bull, but looking at him now, he's magnificent." "How did you know?" Harold smiled, his weathered face creasing with the satisfaction of a man who had spent his life proving that patience and compassion could work miracles. "Tom, I've learned over the years that the animals everyone else gives up on are often the ones with the most to give. Goliath wasn't broken. He was just waiting for someone to see his potential." But Harold's greatest joy came from the simple daily interactions with Goliath. The bull had developed a routine of greeting Harold each morning with a gentle rumble, pressing his massive head against the elderly veterinarian's chest in a gesture of affection that never failed to move Harold to tears. In Goliath's dark eyes, Harold no longer saw the defeat and resignation that had marked their first meeting. Instead, he saw trust, contentment, and something that looked remarkably like gratitude. As winter settled over the Montana landscape, Harold often stood at his kitchen window watching Goliath in the snow-covered pasture, marveling at the transformation that had taken place. The rejected bull had become a source of joy and purpose that had reinvigorated Harold's own sense of meaning in his later years. Together they had proved that second chances, when offered with patience and love, could create miracles that defied every expectation. The healing process was complete, but Harold sensed that their story was far from over. Spring would bring new challenges and opportunities, and he suspected that Goliath's remarkable recovery was about to attract attention that would test everything they had built together. Spring arrived early at Harold Whitman's farm, bringing with it an unexpected visitor that would change everything for both him and Goliath. Dr. Margaret Stevenson, director of the Montana Cattle Breeders Association, had driven 3 hours to see for herself the bull that was becoming legendary throughout the region's farming communities. Word of Goliath's remarkable transformation had reached her through the agricultural network, and the stories seemed too extraordinary to believe. Harold watched from his kitchen window as the official vehicle pulled into his modest driveway, followed by 2 additional cars carrying what appeared to be industry representatives. At 80 years old now, Harold had learned to be wary of sudden interest from the cattle establishment, especially when it involved animals they had previously rejected. Dr. Stevenson, a woman in her 50s with the authoritative bearing of someone accustomed to evaluating million-dollar breeding stock, emerged from her vehicle and immediately focused her attention on Goliath, who was grazing peacefully in the near pasture. Even from a distance, the bull's transformation was undeniable. His coat gleamed like polished obsidian in the morning sun. His massive frame carried itself with aristocratic grace, and his movements showed no trace of the limp that had marked him as damaged goods at the auction. "Mr. Whitman, I'm Dr. Stevenson from the Breeders Association," she said, extending her hand as Harold emerged from the house. "I've heard some remarkable things about your bull, and I had to see for myself if the reports were accurate." Harold accepted the handshake with the calm dignity that had characterized his entire career. "Doctor, Goliath speaks for himself. You're welcome to observe him, though I should mention he's not for sale at any price." Dr. Stevenson smiled at what she assumed was the protective instinct of an elderly farmer who had grown attached to his animal. But as she began her professional evaluation of Goliath, her expression shifted from polite interest to genuine amazement. The bull before her displayed conformation that belonged in championship rings, not on a modest retirement farm. "Mr. Whitman, this animal's bone structure and muscle development are exceptional. May I ask about his breeding history?" Dr. Stevenson's voice carried the excitement of someone who recognized extraordinary genetic potential. Harold shared what he knew about Goliath's background, including the DNA analysis that had revealed his connection to Thunder Valley Champion. Dr. Stevenson's eyes widened as she realized the implications. This was not just a recovered animal, but potentially one of the most valuable breeding bulls in the region. "Have you considered entering Goliath in breeding competitions? With his bloodline and current condition, he could be extremely successful," Dr. Stevenson suggested, her mind already calculating the potential impact on the industry. but Harold's response surprised her. "Doctor, Goliath has already won the only competition that matters to me. He's proven that with proper care and respect, any animal can recover their dignity. That's worth more than any trophy." Dr. Stevenson studied Harold's weathered face, recognizing the quiet conviction of a man who had found something more valuable than commercial success. But she also understood the broader implications of Goliath's transformation for the cattle industry's understanding of animal rehabilitation and genetic potential. Word of Dr. Stevenson's visit spread quickly through the Montana cattle community, and within days, Harold's quiet farm became an unexpected destination for breeders, agricultural officials, and curious neighbors. Each visitor left with the same sense of wonder at what they had witnessed. A bull that had been discarded as worthless had become a living testament to the power of compassionate care and expert rehabilitation. But it was the arrival of Clayton Matthews, the wealthy rancher who had mocked Harold's purchase at the auction, that created the most dramatic confrontation. Matthews pulled up to the farm in his expensive truck, accompanied by several associates, his expression carrying the arrogance of a man unaccustomed to being proven wrong. "Well, Whitman, I heard you managed to fatten up that crippled bull you bought," Matthews called out as he approached the pasture where Goliath grazed. "Thought I'd come see what all the fuss is about." Harold remained silent as Matthews and his companion studied Goliath, watching their expressions change from dismissive amusement to growing disbelief. The bull they were observing bore no resemblance to the limping, defeated animal they remembered from the auction 8 months earlier. "That can't be the same bull," one of Matthews's associates muttered. "This animal has championship bloodlines written all over him." Matthews' face flushed red as he realized the magnitude of his error in judgment. "Whitman, I'll give you $50,000 for that bull right now. Cash. That's more than most animals sell for at premium auctions." Harold's response was quiet but firm. "Mr. Matthews, Goliath is not for sale, he's family." The rejection stung Matthews' pride, especially in front of his associates. "Don't be ridiculous, old man. That's more money than your entire farm is worth. You can't seriously turn down an offer like that for sentimental reasons." It was then that Goliath did something that left everyone speechless. The bull, who had been grazing peacefully throughout the conversation, walked deliberately to the fence where Harold stood and gently pressed his massive head against the elderly veterinarian's chest. The gesture was so tender, so obviously affectionate, that it silenced even Matthews' protests. "You see, Mr. Matthews," Harold said softly, stroking Goliath's broad forehead, "some things in this world can't be bought. Goliath chose to trust me when no one else would give him a chance. That trust is worth more than all your money." Matthews left the farm in frustrated silence, but news of his failed attempt to purchase Goliath only added to the bull's growing reputation. Agricultural publications began featuring stories about the miracle bull of Montana, and Harold found himself fielding calls from reporters, breeders, and animal welfare organizations from across the country. Dr. Chen from the university visited regularly to document Goliath's continued development, and her research was contributing to new understanding of genetic expression and environmental influence on animal development. "Harold, Goliath's case is revolutionizing how we think about animal rehabilitation and genetic potential," she explained during one of her visits. "He's proving that proper care can unlock genetic expression that was suppressed by trauma and neglect." But for Harold, the scientific recognition was secondary to the personal satisfaction of watching Goliath thrive. The bull had become his constant companion, following him around the farm like an enormous, gentle dog. Their daily routines had evolved into a partnership built on mutual respect and affection that transcended the typical relationship between farmer and livestock. Local children from the community had begun visiting the farm regularly, drawn by stories of the gentle giant who had overcome rejection and abuse. Harold welcomed these visits, understanding that Goliath's story carried important lessons about resilience, second chances, and the power of compassion. The bull seemed to enjoy the attention, lowering his head to receive gentle pats from small hands and standing perfectly still for photographs. As summer approached, Harold reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The rejected bull had become a symbol of hope for countless people who had followed his story, while Harold himself had found a renewed sense of purpose in his later years. Their bond had enriched both their lives in ways that no amount of money could quantify. But Harold also sensed that greater challenges lay ahead. Goliath's growing fame was attracting attention from forces beyond the local farming community, and the elderly veterinarian worried about protecting the peaceful life they had built together. The bull who had once been unwanted was now desired by many, and Harold knew that their greatest test would be preserving the trust and contentment that had made Goliath's transformation possible in the first place. The recognition was gratifying, but Harold's greatest satisfaction came from the quiet moments when he and Goliath simply enjoyed each other's company, two souls who had found healing and purpose in their unlikely friendship. 2 years after the auction that had brought them together, Harold Whitman's modest farm had become something extraordinary, not through grand expansion or commercial development, but through the quiet power of a story that had touched hearts across the nation. The bond between the elderly veterinarian and the rejected bull had inspired a movement that extended far beyond their Montana pastures. On this particular autumn morning, Harold stood at his kitchen window watching Goliath interact with a group of special visitors, children from the regional rehabilitation center who came monthly to spend time with the gentle giant. The bull, now in magnificent condition and radiating health and contentment, lowered his massive head to allow a young girl in a wheelchair to stroke his nose. The child's face glowed with joy as she experienced the trust of an animal who understood what it meant to overcome adversity. Dr. Sarah Chen approached Harold from the barn, tablet in hand, an expression filled with the satisfaction of groundbreaking research validated. "Harold, the university wants to establish a formal study center here, based on everything we've learned from Goliath's recovery. Your methods have challenged fundamental assumptions about animal rehabilitation and genetic expression." Harold nodded thoughtfully, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. "Sarah, I've spent my whole life learning that animals respond to patience and respect just like people do. If that's groundbreaking science, then maybe we've been doing things wrong for too long." The transformation at Harold's farm had indeed become a model for compassionate animal care that was being studied and replicated across the country. Agricultural schools were incorporating Harold's rehabilitation techniques into their curricula, while animal welfare organizations used Goliath's story to advocate for better treatment of rejected livestock. But it was the human impact that moved Harold most deeply. The steady stream of visitors to the farm included not just agricultural professionals and researchers, but families, children, and individuals who found inspiration in the story of second chances and redemption. Harold had received thousands of letters from people who related their own experiences of being overlooked, rejected, or written off by others, only to find success when someone finally believed in their potential. Margaret Torres, a single mother who had driven 6 hours from Colorado with her autistic son Danny, exemplified the kind of visitor that had become common at the farm. Danny, who struggled with social interactions and had been dismissed by several schools as unteachable, showed remarkable calm and focus when working with Goliath. The bull seemed to sense the boy's special needs and adjusted his behavior accordingly, standing perfectly still and breathing slowly to create a calming presence. "Mr. Whitman, Danny hasn't spoken to anyone outside our family in 2 years, Margaret explained as they watched her son gently brush Goliath's coat. "But something about Goliath makes him feel safe. He asked me last night if we could move here so he could take care of the bull every day." Harold smiled, recognizing the same transformative power that had first drawn him to Goliath. "Margaret, healing isn't always about fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's about finding where you belong and who accepts you as you are." The farm had also become a destination for elderly visitors who found renewed purpose in Harold's example. Robert Chen, a retired engineer who had felt useless since his wife's death, had started volunteering at the farm 3 days a week, helping with maintenance and finding joy in contributing to something meaningful. His renewed vitality inspired his adult children to reconsider their assumptions about aging and capability. Dr. Stevenson from the Breeders' Association had become a regular visitor, not to pressure Harold about commercial opportunities, but to document the revolutionary approach to animal care that was emerging from their partnership. "Harold, you've proven that emotional well-being and proper nutrition can unlock genetic potential that traditional breeding methods often suppress. Goliath isn't just recovered, he's exceeded every prediction about his capabilities." The bull's gentle temperament and obvious intelligence had indeed challenged conventional wisdom about cattle behavior and training. Goliath responded to voice commands with precision that amazed visitors, demonstrated problem-solving abilities that bordered on the remarkable, and showed emotional intelligence that suggested animals were far more complex than most people understood. Local veterinarian Dr. Amanda Foster, who had initially been skeptical of Harold's old-fashioned methods, had become one of his strongest advocates. "I've practiced modern veterinary medicine for 15 years, but watching Harold work with Goliath has taught me that technology is only as good as the compassion behind it," He's shown me that sometimes the best medicine is simply caring enough to see potential where others see problems. Clayton Matthews, the wealthy rancher who had mocked Harold's purchase and later offered $50,000 for Goliath, had undergone his own transformation. Humbled by the magnitude of his misjudgment, Matthews had quietly begun implementing Harold's rehabilitation techniques with his own rejected animals. He never spoke publicly about his change in approach, but local farmers noticed that animals once destined for slaughter were now receiving second chances on the Matthews ranch. As autumn deepened into winter, Harold often reflected on the unexpected direction his retirement had taken. At 81, he had anticipated spending his remaining years in quiet solitude, perhaps tending a small garden and reading veterinary journals. Instead, he found himself at the center of a quiet revolution in animal care and human compassion. The letters and emails continued to arrive daily, from other elderly people who had found new purpose in helping animals, from young veterinarians inspired to prioritize compassion alongside clinical skill, from parents of special needs children who had discovered the therapeutic power of animal interaction, and from countless individuals who simply wanted to thank Harold for proving that second chances could create miracles. But Harold's greatest satisfaction came from the quiet moments with Goliath, when the bull would seek him out in the pasture, and they would simply stand together, two old friends who had found healing in each other's company. The rejected bull had become Harold's constant companion, following him around the farm and greeting each day with the contentment of an animal who knew he was valued and loved. One evening, as snow began to fall over the Montana landscape, Harold stood in the barn brushing Goliath's coat and reflecting on their journey together. The bull stood perfectly still, rumbling softly with the satisfaction of an animal completely at peace with his life and circumstances. "You know, boy," Harold said quietly, his voice filled with the wisdom of 8 decades, "they all thought I was crazy for buying you that day, said I was a foolish old man throwing away my money on a worthless animal. But you and I know the truth. Sometimes the most valuable things in life come disguised as problems that need solving." Goliath turned his head to look at Harold with those same intelligent dark eyes that had first captured the veterinarian's attention at the auction. In that gaze, Harold saw contentment, trust, and something that looked remarkably like gratitude for the second chance that had transformed both their lives. The rejected bull had become a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or undervalued. His story proved that with patience, compassion, and belief in hidden potential, the most unlikely partnerships could create transformations that inspired communities and changed lives. Harold had saved Goliath from rejection and slaughter, but in return, Goliath had given Harold a purpose and joy that had enriched his final years beyond measure. Together, they had shown the world that true worth couldn't be measured at auction, and that sometimes the most meaningful victories came not from defeating others, but from lifting up those whom everyone else had abandoned. As the snow continued to fall outside, Harold finished his evening care routine and prepared to return to the warm house. Goliath would spend the night in his warm stall, surrounded by fresh hay and the security of knowing he was valued. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, new opportunities to share their story, and new chances to prove that compassion could triumph over judgment. The elderly veterinarian and the rejected bull had found in each other not just companionship, but a shared mission to demonstrate that every living being deserved the chance to show their true potential when given proper care and respect. Their story would continue to inspire long after both were gone, a testament to the transformative power of seeing worth where others saw only problems.